treason. Until a certain moment, it seemed to me that this topic was simple and clear, like a hot dog recipe. You take a bun, a sausage, that's all. You live with confidence that you know the rules. Don't go to the left, and everything will be fine. But life loves to destroy our ideas, and one day you are faced with doubt. Is betrayal only physical contact, or is there something more dangerous, emotional attraction that destroys relationships no worse than a random night on the side? Where is this line? Many people say, if there was no sex, there was no betrayal. They laugh, Lord, what kind of betrayal? We're not in bed together. So everything is clean, like your kitchen after a spring cleaning once a year. But the reality is more complicated, especially in our age of smartphones and social networks. It seems that he just sent a funny meme to a colleague at night, adding a couple of compliments solely to amuse him. And in the morning you wake up in a cold sweat. Have I gone too far? Thus begins philosophical reflections worthy of Plato, only instead of ancient Greece your kitchen, the height of a hangover, and a bunch of unread messages. We are used to considering sex with another person to be cheating, but in reality, physical intimacy is only the final boss. Before him, there were a lot of mini-bosses, flirtatious correspondence, exchange of jokes with obvious subtext, likes for photos in a swimsuit or without. It's just communication, right? But emotional betrayal creeps into your head quietly, like a cat that suddenly finds itself on your lap, even though you didn't call for it. At first, you just help with advice, then you catch yourself thinking that you are looking forward to a new message, and then you realize, what an ambush, I'm sharing my thoughts with this person, which my other half doesn't even know about. And let's be honest, sometimes this emotional involvement hurts more than accidentally getting knocked out at a party after your fifth beer. Physical betrayal may be a mistake of the moment, but a spiritual connection on the side is a conscious choice. And this choice hits the hardest. I have a friend who likes to quote smart people most often over a glass of ale, accompanied by inappropriate laughter. He often repeats the words of Mark Twain, "Marriage is not so much a matter of love as it is a matter of trust." Of course, it happens that he confuses Mark Twain with Marilyn Monroe, but the essence remains the same. When trust breaks down, relationships fall apart at the seams, like a shirt after a Sunday barbecue if you haven't been very careful about your diet. It's easy to break trust. It's enough to start hiding your phone, deleting messages, so that there are no unnecessary questions, brushing off with a vague, yes, nothing special, when calling a colleague late in the evening. And now an alarming question hangs in the air. Are they telling me everything? It doesn't seem to be a big deal, but a residue remains. Research in the United States confirms that almost half of those surveyed consider not only sex to be cheating, but also a deep emotional connection. And this is not surprising. After all, emotional involvement is no longer just a random intersection of thoughts, but a search for understanding and warmth on the side. And then there's flirting. Flirting is like going to the supermarket on an empty stomach. I didn't plan to buy pizza, but now it's already in the cart, especially if it develops into a daily exchange of hints and jokes that have long gone beyond the boundaries of harmless. Nietzsche, or someone like that, whose memory sometimes fails after Friday get-togethers, said, "We can betray not only with deeds, but also with thoughts." Of course, we all notice attractive people, that's normal. But there is a difference between fleeting sympathy and when plans for the future with this person are already being made in your head. When you begin to feed these thoughts, fan the spark, real action becomes only a matter of time. And this is the main pain of betrayal, the realization that you are no longer chosen. The person you trusted is now giving their time, emotions, and attention to someone else. Hemingway said, "The worst thing about betrayal is that it never comes from your enemies." This is true. Let your enemies betray you, that's why they are enemies. But a blow from a loved one leaves a scar for a long time. Cheating destroys not only relationships, but also self-confidence. You look in the mirror and ask, where did I go wrong? And even worse, should I trust someone in the future? But this is a road to nowhere. Living in fear means not living at all. But after betrayal, you twitch every time your partner says, I went to my friends, just let's chat. And everything good lightness, trust, sincerity crumbles into dust under the weight of doubt. So what is considered treason? The official version is sex on the side. But in reality, cheating begins with an innocent click on the smartphone screen, with a conversation that you are not ready to voice to your partner. As soon as a cover-up appears, this is an alarm bell. We always know when we cross the border. The problem is that we fucking love this feeling. But is it worth the trust that has been built over the years? That's the question. Nobody says that looking around is a crime. But when you tell your innermost thoughts not to your partner, but to a nice acquaintance, you are already on a slippery slope, and then it's a matter of time. What to do if this happens, how to live further, realize why this happened, find out if there is an opportunity to fix something, decide if it is possible to trust again. Revenge? Oh, I can already imagine how many of you are thinking, no man should forgive such disrespect. Divorce. Burn this bitch. I am increasingly coming to the conclusion that betrayal is a choice, loyalty too, and if once this choice was not made in your favor, should you expect that this will not happen again? My name is Alex Collins. I'm 38 and live in Chicago, a city that taught me to play by tough rules. Here I built my life from scratch, created a successful business, and was confident that I was in control. I own a chain of luxury car dealerships. My deals are calculated down to the last cent, and my competitors know not to mess with me. In the business world, I am used to keeping everything under strict control. But there are things that do not obey logic, numbers, and cold calculation. I have always believed that you can manage risks, calculate moves in advance, but betrayal comes from where you don't expect it. It destroys not only trust, but also the very essence of the relationship. After all, once you were the only choice, but now you are just an option among others. This is not a business where losses can be compensated. This is personal. And if life has taught me one thing, weakness is not forgiven here. One evening, when my mother went out to meet her friends again, I approached my father. He sat in his old chair, holding in front of him a newspaper that he had not read for a long time. The light from the lamp made his face tired, almost transparent. "You know, right?" I asked. He slowly lowered the newspaper and looked at me, long, carefully. "What are you talking about, son?" His voice was even, but empty. I swallowed. "About Mom." He closed his eyes for a second, as if trying to block out this reality. Then he nodded slowly. "I know. Why don't you do anything? Why do you endure?" There was a challenge in my voice. He sighed, ran his hand over his face, as if washing away the fatigue from him, and looked towards the window. "Because sometimes people don't have a choice, Alex." I frowned. "Do you have one? You can get a divorce." He smiled sadly. "And what next? Where will I go? She will deprive me of everything." He hesitated for a second. "And most importantly, you." I froze. "I am your son. I will always be with you." He shook his head. "You are still a child. The court will leave you with your mother. She will say everything that needs to be done to make it so. And I." He closed his eyes. "I can't lose you." I was silent. "What does money have to do with it?" I asked quietly. At that age, I still did not understand how our legal system works and why in a divorce a woman gets almost everything: a child, a house, finances, alimony. He smiled sadly again. My father looked at me with a tired, extinct look in which bitterness, fear, and hopelessness were mixed. He ran his hand over his face as if he hoped to erase the burden of impending problems, and with a heavy sigh, he sat down opposite. "You must understand, son." His voice sounded evenly, but there was a hidden trembling in it. "In our state, divorce for a man is a death sentence, especially if he has children." He leaned closer, resting his elbows on his knees, and continued. "This house belongs to her family, which means I can't even spend the night here. They will throw me out like a useless thing, and it doesn't matter how many years I lived here or how much money I invested. They will leave me only the clothes that I have time to collect." He grinned, but there was no joy in his smile, only bitterness. "Alimony? Of course they will prescribe them for me. And it doesn't matter that I'm not a millionaire. It doesn't matter that their size will make me a beggar. They won't leave me a choice, pay up or go to jail. And do you think I can find a good job after this? He shook his head. In our city, she has family, friends, connections. All you have to do is tell her that I abandoned you, that I am a monster, and that's all. No one will shake hands with me. I won't be hired for a decent job. I won't be invited to an interview. I will become an outcast, and the court won't even listen to me. He sighed heavily and ran his hand over his head, as if trying to put his thoughts in order. I'm not saying I want to leave. I just want you to know the truth. Divorce in my case is death. Maybe not physical, but social, financial, moral. And the worst thing is that you will stay with her, and they will turn me into a wallet that you will see a couple of times a month, if you see it at all. There was a melancholy sound in his voice that made the boy feel uneasy. It was the first time he saw his father like this, not strong, not self-confident, but scared and tired. I didn't know what to say. Only now I understood he did not just endure. He was a prisoner of this life, deprived of the right to vote. That night I couldn't sleep for a long time. I lay there, listening to my mother talking quietly to someone on the phone in the hallway, listening to the door lock click as she carefully stepped outside. Like a father sitting in the living room in the dark without turning on the light. I thought about his words, about how fear can fetter a person, deprive him of his will, force him to be a shadow in his own home. And I swore to myself, I will not endure, never. And now I'm here, as a man who faced what he hated most. And the question I ask myself is not why this happened, but what to do next. Divorce? Revenge? Forgiveness? Who, looking at my life from the outside, could perhaps say that I have everything. A large house in a prestigious area, a view of the river, huge panoramic windows through which every morning I watch the awakening city. Steel skyscrapers illuminated by the first rays of the sun, streets filled with early pedestrians and cars rushing to work. I can afford everything I want. The best restaurants, expensive suits, cars that many have never even seen in person. But you know, there is one but in all this. An ideal is something that seems solid until you start to peer into the cracks. I've been working towards this for a long time. I started with a small garage where I sold used cars. It smelled of machine oil and metal, and in winter ice froze in the corners. I worked for days, hardly slept. He bought cars, repaired them with his own hands, brought them to life, polished them to a shine, and resold them. The first years were hell. Accounts are on the verge of zero. Competitors are ready to devour. Every day is a struggle. And sometimes I fell asleep right there, on a cot in the corner, to the sound of water dripping from a rusty pipe. Did you spend the night here again? Tom, my first hired mechanic, asked me, walking into the garage with coffee in his hands. What's the difference? I brushed it off, although in fact the fatigue was pressing harder every day. You're pushing yourself. Is this the point? I just laughed then, because I knew, if not me, then who? I now have a network of car dealerships that serve clients I could never have dreamed of before. Business is going well, money is flowing like a river. I'm used to this rhythm. I'm used to taking risks. I'm used to a game where the stakes are always high. My work is exciting, controlled, risky, but always calculated. We have a contract with a company from Los Angeles. They want to meet in person. The secretary's voice brings me out of my thoughts. Make an appointment in my office or in a restaurant. I glance at my watch. There is little time, the day has just begun, but it is already scheduled minute by minute. They chose a reputable restaurant, panoramic windows overlooking Chicago at night, dim lighting, white tablecloths, and waiters moving with controlled grace. I arrived a little earlier. I ordered black coffee and sat at a table by the window, taking out my phone. The usual preparation before a meeting is to check email, review contract details, but my eye was caught by one scene at the next table. A man in an impeccably fitting dark blue suit sat opposite a striking woman in a scarlet dress. The light from the crystal chandelier reflected in the polished cufflinks on his cuffs, and his slender fingers lightly grasped the crystal glass of wine. He was calm, frighteningly calm. She looked like she was about to lose control. Fear flickered in her eyes, a hidden plea. Trembling ran through her clenched fingers. The scarlet dress, like tongues of flame, enveloped her fragile figure, but now it seemed that this fire was about to go out. John slowly, almost lazily, took a small velvet box from his inner pocket. The clasp clicked. He carefully placed the ring in front of her, simple but expensive, with a flawlessly shining diamond. His voice sounded quiet, but every syllable cut like shards of ice. I knew. I've known for a long time. I was just waiting for the moment. She swallowed, unable to take her eyes off the ring, as if it were not a decoration, but a sentence. Her fingers trembled, her nails dug into the skin of her palms. John, listen, No need. He raised his hand to cut off her pathetic excuse. There was no anger or pain in his gaze, only cold inevitability. You didn't explain yourself when you met him. Why now? She closed her eyes, as if hoping that if she didn't see him, then all this would disappear like a bad dream. Her voice trembled. It was a mistake. I got confused. John leaned forward slightly, his breath almost touching her skin. No, he said slowly, you made a choice. She wanted to say something, but the words got stuck in her throat. My heart was beating wildly, and now I'm making my own. He stood up, straightened up, and took one last look at her. Goodbye. He turned around and walked away without looking back. The restaurant froze. The visitors, the waiters, even the quiet music, everything seemed frozen, awaiting her reaction. She was left alone, with trembling lips, with an empty gaze, with a ring that now seemed heavy, like the burden of one's own mistakes. Or maybe this is the best way to leave. I did not immediately notice how representatives of the company with which we were going to conclude a contract entered the hall. 3 men in perfectly fitting suits moved confidently, unhurriedly, with the ease inherent in people accustomed to success. Their walk spoke for itself. They knew that the deal would take place. At the head was Richard Marshall, a tall, stately man of about 45, with piercing gray eyes. His gaze was tenacious and analytical, but his smile looked friendly, meticulous to the smallest detail. He extended his hand to me, and his firm handshake spoke of strength of character and confidence. Alex, nice to meet you. I hope you like the restaurant. I nodded slightly, shaking his hand. Excellent choice. Elegant, but without frills. Marshall grinned approvingly. Well, I'm glad you got the atmosphere right. Let's get straight to the point, shall we? Certainly. We took our places at the table. The waiter almost silently placed the drinks in front of us, and soon the conversation smoothly turned to numbers, terms, and conditions. I listened carefully, did not interrupt, caught the slightest intonation in the voice of Richard and his colleagues, and noted their reactions. They were prepared and confident, but I wasn't going to give up the initiative either. There was a deal on the line that could open up new prospects, but I couldn't let them feel even the slightest advantage. We're ready to sign, Richard finally said, carefully putting the papers aside. The conditions suit both parties. I took the documents and ran my eyes along the lines. Everything was as we discussed. No surprises. Calmly, without fuss, I signed and handed the pen to Marshall. He took it, raising his eyebrows slightly, and a light, satisfied smile appeared on his face. Great deal, Alex. Your business sense is impressive. I answered him with the same confident look, allowing myself a slight grin. Just a habit of winning. The contract was concluded. Another success. It was already late. There was no point in going to the office. I decided to head home. On the way, I stopped at a small grocery store to buy something tasty for dinner. Then he stopped by the toy department and picked up a new Lego set for Danny, which he had been wanting for a long time. My wife, Victoria, went on another business trip. Therefore, dinner was intended only for me and Danny. Victoria is beautiful, well-groomed, cold, like the winter air on the shores of Lake Michigan. Previously, there was life and fire in her eyes, but now there is only an icy gaze, behind which hides something that I have not been able to read for a long time. Previously, we could talk for hours. Now conversations are reduced to exchanging phrases on the run. Will you pick up your son from school? Yes. What are we having for dinner? I'll order something. Lately, it seems to me that we are just playing family without experiencing anything real. Son, Danny, he's 8. He grows up in a world of expensive toys, private school, and vacation trips to Europe. He has everything that I could only dream of at his age. And here's the most interesting thing: I have everything, but the feeling of emptiness is growing, like a crack in glass. House, money, status, family, but inside there is emptiness. You know, when you live in such a rhythm, you don't immediately notice how you are moving away, how the cold becomes the norm, and love becomes a distant memory. I met Victoria through my best friend, Michael Stewart. Mike was a man whose nerves had been fairly frayed by life. In his youth, he made a mistake that cost him several years behind bars. He was truly in love with his girlfriend, Caitlin, but one day he caught her with someone else. Anger clouded his eyes, and he could not restrain himself. He beat his lover so that he ended up in the hospital. As a result, he received a sentence for causing grievous bodily harm. And Caitlin? She simply married someone else while Mike rotted behind bars. She didn't even try to help him, didn't come to a single court, didn't write a single letter. For a long time, he tried to understand how the person he loved so much could so easily erase him from his life. When he came out, he had nothing. No money, no work, no people's trust. The world had changed for him. It seemed alien. Then I offered him a place in one of my car dealerships. He started as a simple mechanic, then became a manager, and a few years later, he opened his own small workshop. He didn't just get out, he changed. I took anger management courses, learned to control myself, and rebuild my life. We often talked at night, discussing his past. He admitted, "At some point I thought that my life was over, that no one will have the desire to help me, that for people I will always remain that same guy who could not restrain himself. But you know, Alex, sometimes you need someone who will just say, 'Try again.'" It was he who introduced me to Victoria. She was Caitlin's best friend, but after they broke up, they continued to be friendly, ironically. Mike talked me into going on a blind date, saying that I was too focused on work, and it was time to relax. I wasn't particularly keen, but I agreed. We met in a cozy restaurant on the lake. A light breeze carried the smell of water and freshly cut grass, and the sun, breaking through the foliage of the trees, created a play of light and shadows on the terrace. Victoria appeared as if she had stepped off the cover of a magazine, beautiful, confident. Her dress emphasized her figure, and her high heels gave grace to her gait. Then she laughed, told stories, looked straight into my eyes, as if studying me. She had an infectious laugh that made you forget about stress. I involuntarily listened to her voice, hanging on every word. That evening, she seemed to me the embodiment of femininity and lightness. "You don't seem to really believe in such acquaintances?" she asked, taking a sip of wine. "Honestly, not good, but now I'm starting to change my mind." She smiled, and then I thought maybe it was fate. That evening we talked about everything, about work, about plans, about dreams. She talked about how she wanted to become a lawyer, but ended up going into marketing. How he loves to travel and dreams of seeing the northern lights. I caught myself thinking that it was easy for me with her, that I wanted to listen to her voice and watch her gestures. Mike said that you are a workaholic. She narrowed her eyes slyly. This is true? Maybe. But today I'm glad he made me take a break. We met several more times, and each time I recognized something new in her. She was strong, but at the same time soft. Smart, but not arrogant. She had an elegance that did not require proof, a confidence that did not oppress, but bewitched. Victoria had natural grace. Tall, with long, wavy dark hair, brown eyes in which one could read a keen interest in the world. She moved with ease, smiled so that it became warmer inside, and her voice deep, enveloping, sounded like music. I fell in love not with one feature, but with everything it represented. In her ringing, sincere laughter, which seemed to fill the space with light and warmth. In her confidence, which was manifested in her every movement, in the way she held her posture, how she looked straight into the eyes, not afraid to be frank. Her ability to equally easily talk about serious, almost philosophical things about the future of humanity, about the complexities of politics, about global changes, and then, instantly, switched to jokes about the absurdities of everyday life, laughing so contagiously that I could not help but succumb to this fun. We looked at life the same way, not getting hung up on the little things, but appreciating every opportunity, every step forward. We both understood that a career is an important part of life, but without a family, without those for whom all this is done, success loses its meaning. Her dreams for the future echoed mine. She wanted children too, maybe three. I imagined how she would hold a newborn baby in her arms, with that gentle, happy expression on her face that I already knew and loved. I saw how our whole family would walk in the park, laugh, argue about trifles over Sunday breakfast, how our children would inherit her liveliness, her intelligence, her kindness. I didn't just love her, I saw in her everything I wanted from life. When we were in bed for the first time, it was not just a physical act, it was akin to a revelation. It was as if our bodies were speaking in a language that existed long before us, weaving patterns of desire, longing, and attraction. Every touch echoed through us, flaring up with a heat that could not be extinguished. Her skin seemed like fire, her breath like a spell, destroying the last barriers between us. I felt her fingers, so confident and demanding, sliding along my back, leaving a trail of goosebumps and promises. She knew how to drive you crazy not only with her body, but also with the way she looked, the way she held her breath at the moments when we met in a place where neither space, nor time, nor separate I and you any longer existed. We didn't just make love, we tested each other's strength, explored, pushed each other to the limit. There was so much passion in her, so much sensual audacity that I lost control, forgot about everything except her. She didn't hold back, and it drove me crazy. It was not just a night, it was a storm from which it was impossible to hide. And I wouldn't. Because with her, it was more than sex. It was dissolution, immersion, complete absorption into each other. The wedding was exactly the way I wanted it to be, without unnecessary noise, without ostentation, without hundreds of people, half of whom we wouldn't even know. This was not a day for tradition or display of status, it was a day for us. We rented a small country house on the coast, and I still remember how the warm sea breeze mixed with the aromas of fried meat, wine, and evening air soaked in salt. There were no official ceremonies, long speeches, or forced smiles, only close friends, laughter, and lightness. Simple wooden tables under garlands of warm light, casually placed glasses, blankets for those who want to stay longer. All this created a feeling of something truly important, something real. But to be honest, it's not the decor or the menu that I remember. I remember Victoria. She walked towards me without pathos, without theatricality, but with the grace that was always in her. The white dress was not too fluffy, not too tight, but just something that emphasized her beauty without overshadowing her. Her hair fell loosely over her shoulders, and the light sea wind tangled in it. She didn't try to look like a princess, and that's why she was beautiful. When I took her hand, I realized the whole world is now narrowing to this moment. Until this look. She looked at me as no one had ever looked at me, as if I was her universe. At that moment, I was not thinking about the guests. I was not thinking about what the dinner would be or how strong the whiskey would be. I didn't care about anything except her. Then there were dances not staged, but live, natural, when you simply hold your beloved woman close to you and move to the beat of the music, even if it plays only in your head. There were toasts short, but sincere, without official, memorized phrases. It was their wedding night, but that's a completely different story. After the wedding, we flew to France. Paris was too predictable a choice, so we went to Provence, a land of lavender, narrow streets, and vineyards. We lived in an old stone house, where the windows looked directly onto endless fields. In the morning, the sun flooded our house with golden light, and we woke up to the singing of birds. In the morning, we drank coffee on the terrace. In the afternoon, we walked around wine farms, tasted local wines, talked with winemakers who lovingly talked about each grape variety. Sometimes we would just hop on our bikes and ride along the scenic paths, stopping to take photos or buy fresh cheese and baguettes at small markets. In the evenings, Tired and happy, we sat by the fireplace, enjoying the aromas of French cuisine, which Victoria mastered with enthusiasm. We discussed the future and made plans. We both loved our jobs, but we understood that family was more than a career. Victoria dreamed of opening her own marketing firm, and I knew that one day she would do it. I was making plans to expand the network of car dealerships and was thinking about launching an exclusive car service center. We discussed the children, imagined how we would take them to school, and how the three of us would spend our first Christmas. Victoria wanted a girl. I said that I would be glad to have a son, but in the end we laughed and admitted that the main thing was just to be together. One evening we drove to Avignon and spent the night walking along the fortress walls, illuminated by yellow lanterns. There, on the Pont Saint-Benezet, Victoria suddenly stopped, looked at me and said, "I think I've never been so happy." I hugged her, feeling the quiet evening wind rushing between us, pressing her hair to my face. "This is just the beginning," I said. These days in Provence were closeness and the realization that we chose each other for a reason. We knew that challenges lay ahead, but we were confident that together we would cope. This trip became more than just a honeymoon for us. She became the foundation on which we built our life together. After the honeymoon, we returned to reality. A year later, Victoria told me that she was pregnant. I remember that day she simply put the test on the table next to my coffee and sat opposite me, looking at me, waiting for a reaction. "Is this serious?" I asked, although I already understood everything. "Well, unless the test decided to make fun of me," she grinned. I nodded silently, realizing that my life was about to change forever. But, I was damn glad. We didn't discuss this in advance, didn't make specific plans, but I knew I want this child. Victoria's pregnancy was relatively calm. Of course, there were mood swings, strange desires like strawberries and pickles, and periodic breakdowns when she cried because of a dog food commercial. But overall, we managed. I was there, taking her to checkups, preparing her breakfast when she couldn't get out of bed in the morning. At some point, I realized that not only she was changing, but also me. The responsibility I felt grew with each passing month. The birth of my son was the most powerful moment in my life. I stood nearby, holding Victoria's hand, when she squeezed it so hard that she almost broke my fingers. And then, after all the screaming and tension, I heard his first cry. Danny. He was tiny, but when I held him in my arms, I realized that now there is a creature in this world for whom I am ready to move mountains. We spent several months in this warm cocoon of a new family. Everything changed. The nights became sleepless, the days filled with worries about the child, but it was the best chaos I could imagine. Victoria devoted herself completely to the baby for some time, but I saw the old fire ignite in her again. She missed work, projects, and challenges. And when Danny grew a little older, she began to return to her usual rhythm. Again business calls, again meetings, again the light in the eyes, but a little different. Now she was not only a wife and professional, but also a mother. We were the same Alex and Victoria who dreamed, planned, and laughed. It's just that now everyone had a little more of their own world, to which the other did not always have access. One day Victoria returned home noticeably upset. Usually she knew how to keep her emotions under control, but here there was some kind of mixture of anger and confusion. She kicked off her shoes, exhaled, and threw her bag on the sofa as if she had just left the battlefield. I immediately realized that something serious was happening. "You won't believe what happened today," she said, pouring herself a glass of wine. The voice was tense, the fingers trembled slightly. "If this is again about a client who doesn't understand the difference between marketing and magic, then I'll completely believe it," I chuckled, closing the laptop. No, worse. Our boss, Tom Grayson, caught his wife with a yoga instructor. It's like something out of a cheap sitcom. He returns from a business trip a day early, goes into the bedroom, and there is a classic scene. Imagine, his favorite bed, his wife, and some dude who, apparently, stretches well not only on the rug. I winced and took a sip of whiskey. Damn, this is luck. Did he explode right away? Oh yes, I threw them both out of the house. Moreover, they say, the lover jumped out of the second-floor window. I think if Tom had time, he would not have just thrown him out, but sent him to the hospital. Now our company is in complete chaos. Divorce, division of property, lawyers, threats. If everything falls apart, I will be left without work. She took a deep breath and looked at me. It's just infuriating. Do you want to go for a walk? Get a divorce? Don't fool anyone? It's not difficult. I chuckled and shook my head. Logical. It's a pity that not everyone understands such simple things. Yes, you know what's most interesting? She's playing the victim now. She says that he treated her cruelly, that he should have tried to sort things out. And the fact that she spent several months cuddling with a yogi is kind of normal. Classic, I said. You also say that she wants half the company from him. Victoria rolled her eyes. Exactly. And he also demands moral compensation for stress. I burst out laughing. It's really, really stressful to bring a man into your husband's bedroom. Victoria snorted and then suddenly looked at me seriously. Alex, what would you do if you found out that I was cheating on you? I thought about it. Honestly, I think you yourself know. She nodded and didn't ask any more questions. I then felt relieved. It seemed to me that everything was secure with Victoria, that she values fidelity just as much as I do. That evening we laughed at this story for a long time, discussing how easily people destroy what they have built over the years. Life went on as usual. Work, home, everything was in its place. One day Mike called me. Now he runs his own small business selling and restoring vintage cars. He knew a lot about cars, knew how to find rare models, restore them, and sell them for big money to collectors. We met at a bar, ordered a bottle of beer, and he grinned and said, Alex, I have one idea, but you have to get out of your comfort zone. I grinned in response. Mike, I'm married. This has long been outside of my comfort zone. We laughed, but then he became serious. I know that you have long been cramped within the same business. You achieved everything you wanted, but I see that you are bored. I have a way out. We need to invest in one topic. It will be something completely new. I narrowed my eyes. Speak. Mike outlined the plan. He wanted to create a network of automated garages for restoring and tuning vintage cars, using advanced 3D printing technologies and artificial intelligence. It all sounded futuristic, but it made sense. Cars became collectible, technology made it possible to reduce the cost of restoration, and the demand for unique models only grew. Imagine, Alex, Mike explained with sparkling eyes. You bring us a car that has been trashed, we scan it, restore parts using a 3D printer, and select original components. The entire process is automated, minimum manual work, maximum accuracy. Clients are collectors, wealthy enthusiasts, even filmmakers who need authentic cars. We will be the first to take this business to the next level. And where is my place in this adventure? I asked, shrugging my shoulders. You invest, find investors, control the operational part. I am involved in technical process and marketing. We'll make the perfect duet. I usually don't get involved in risky ventures, but his words stuck with me. This was not just a business, but an opportunity to create something unique. After all, what do we have to lose? Just routine. That night, I couldn't sleep for a long time. Numbers, options, consequences were spinning in my head. Victoria woke up and asked, Are you working in your head again? Well, Mike suggested something interesting. She smiled. You like it. I know that look. You've already made your decision. I chuckled. Damn it, she was right. We never fell asleep. Victoria was drawn to me. Her warmth immediately made me forget about all the calculations and business plans. Over time, our nights didn't become less frequent, they just changed. We understood each other from half a word, from one glance. Her hand on the back of my head, my fingers on her back, all this was not just mechanics, but a language that we knew by heart. Do you ever think that in a long-term relationship, sex becomes like breakfast? She muttered, pretending to bite my earlobe. If breakfast is steak and bourbon, then I agree, I chuckled. She giggled, and I leaned closer. We didn't waste time on the ceremony. Everything was easy, relaxed, even flavored with the usual jokes. Tomorrow I have a meeting at 9 in the morning, she breathed between kisses. And now you have training. Gotta keep yourself in shape, Vic. You will always find something to keep me busy, she grinned. At such moments, I knew for sure that everything was still okay between us. As long as we could laugh, tease each other, and feel that wordless rhythm, everything was fine. When Mike and I started the business, I didn't think it would take off so quickly. Our garages started working within a few months after the first investment. We found a warehouse, equipped it with the latest technology, purchased 3D printers, and hired engineers. Everything went faster than I expected. It seemed that luck was on our side, but with success came new difficulties. First came orders from private clients, those who wanted to restore their grandfather's Mustang or their beloved Corvette. Then collectors got involved, people willing to pay huge amounts of money for the authentic restoration of rare cars. We made a name for ourselves with the first series of cars that we sent to Hollywood for filming. Then large customers began to be interested in our service, from auction houses to car museums. Mike was a marketing genius. He knew how to present the business in such a way that only perfection was expected from us. And I ensured that everything went according to plan. 24/7 calls, meetings with investors, logistics. It all took so long that I sometimes forgot what day it was. At one point, we were working 16 hours a day, barely seeing our family. Alex, if you answer emails at dinner again, I'll replace your pillow with a box of parts, Victoria grumbled, watching me sit with my laptop. Business, dear, can't wait, I joked, without raising my eyes from the screen. What do you think I'm waiting for? Her tone was still joking, but with a hint of irritation. Her words made me think, but not for long. I continued to work at a frantic pace, and Victoria increasingly went to bed alone. Mike and I lived in this project. Our wives sometimes laughed that we spent more time with each other than with them, and I understood that this was really so. The work captured me completely. I saw the prospect, money was flowing, but time slipped away like sand through my fingers. We discussed launching a new branch in Miami and then in Los Angeles. The more we expanded, the fewer free minutes there were. We need another investor to enter the European market, Mike told me one evening, leaning back in his office chair. I'm already working on it. I have a couple of contacts in London who are interested in an exclusive restoration service. You're a machine, Alex, he grinned. But don't forget that even cars need technical inspection. I chuckled. He was right. That's why, when everything became more or less stable with Mike, I immediately organized a family vacation. Work was great, money flowed like a river, but I understood that I couldn't lose what it all started for. And then the Christmas holidays arrived, the perfect excuse to put things aside and spend time with family. I suggested that Victoria and Danny choose a place for the trip. Victoria beamed with joy. She had always loved traveling, but in recent years it had become less and less. When Danny heard that this was his chance to decide where we would go, he was literally jumping for joy. Disneyland, he shouted, clapping his hands. Not Disneyland, I groaned, looking at Victoria with a plea for help. She laughed and, fortunately, offered a compromise. What about a chalet in Colorado? Fresh air, snow, a cozy house by the fireplace. Danny can go snowboarding, and you can finally learn to stand on your skis instead of just falling on them. Great plan, Mom. Danny immediately agreed. I will teach Dad to ride. And so, a few days later, we were sitting on a small plane, heading to Colorado. We rented a cozy chalet in Aspen, a house with huge windows that overlooked the snow-capped peaks. Everything was like a Christmas card. Fluffy snow, smoke from the chimneys, the smell of pine needles, and hot chocolate in the air. From day one, Danny was absolutely delighted. He rushed through the snow, staged snow battles, built huge snowmen, which he then destroyed with a loud laugh. Victoria looked at him with such love that I found myself thinking how much I treasured this moment. In the evenings, we sat by the fireplace, wrapped in warm blankets, and drank mulled wine. Danny demanded a story before bed, and Victoria told him stories, each of which ended with something funny so that he would fall asleep with a smile. Skiing has become its own comedy. Danny really tried to teach me, but instead of graceful descents, I ended up with epic falls. Victoria laughed so hard that tears flowed down her cheeks. "Are you sure you're not a fake stuntman?" she asked when I once again found myself in a snowdrift. "No, I'm just learning the art of skiing through pain," I muttered, shaking myself off. We went to local restaurants, tried Colorado cuisine, and roasted marshmallows over a fire in the courtyard of our chalet. Victoria finally relaxed. Her face no longer seemed tired and tense, as it had been in recent months. We became just a family again, no calls, no work thoughts, no discussion of matters. One day we went on a short hike, admiring frozen waterfalls and majestic snowy peaks. Danny excitedly tried to find animal tracks, and Victoria did not let go of my hand, warming her gloved fingers. We got lost that day, but it was one of the most fun adventures. We wandered through the snowy forest, guided by the sun, and Victoria joked that now we were like pioneers who had to survive. When we finally returned to the chalet, tired but happy, a warm dinner was waiting for us. Victoria prepared hot soup Danny ate with appetite, telling us how he saved us by suggesting we turn in the right direction. One evening, when Danny was already asleep, and we were sitting by the fireplace with glasses of wine, Victoria said quietly, "I think we need to do this more often. Just leave and be together." That's why, when everything became more or less stable with Mike, I immediately organized a family vacation. Work was great, money flowed like a river, but I understood that I couldn't lose what it all started for. And then the Christmas holidays arrived, the perfect excuse to put things aside and spend time with family. I suggested that Victoria and Danny choose a place for the trip. Victoria beamed with joy. She had always loved traveling, but in recent years it had become less and less. When Danny heard that this was his chance to decide where we would go, he was literally jumping for joy. "Disneyland," he shouted, clapping his hands. "Not Disneyland," I groaned, looking at Victoria with a plea for help. She laughed and, fortunately, offered a compromise. "What about a chalet in Colorado? Fresh air, snow, a cozy house by the fireplace. Danny can go snowboarding, and you can finally learn to stand on your skis instead of just falling on them." "Great plan, Mom." Danny immediately agreed. "I will teach Dad to ride." And so, a few days later, we were sitting on a small plane, heading to Colorado. We rented a cozy chalet in Aspen, a house with huge windows that overlooked the snow-capped peaks. Everything was like a Christmas card. Fluffy snow, smoke from the chimneys, the smell of pine needles, and hot chocolate in the air. From day one, Danny was absolutely delighted. He rushed through the snow, staged snow battles, built huge snowmen, which he then destroyed with a loud laugh. Victoria looked at him with such love that I found myself thinking how much I treasured this moment. In the evenings, we sat by the fireplace, wrapped in warm blankets, and drank mulled wine. Danny demanded a story before bed, and Victoria told him stories, each of which ended with something funny so that he would fall asleep with a smile. Skiing has become its own comedy. Danny really tried to teach me, but instead of graceful descents, I ended up with epic falls. Victoria laughed so hard that tears flowed down her cheeks. "Are you sure you're not a fake stuntman?" she asked when I once again found myself in a snowdrift. "No, I'm just learning the art of skiing through pain," I muttered, shaking myself off. We went to local restaurants, tried Colorado cuisine, and roasted marshmallows over a fire in the courtyard of our chalet. Victoria finally relaxed. Her face no longer seemed tired and tense as it had been in recent months. We became just a family again, no calls, no work thoughts, no discussion of matters. One evening, after Danny had fallen asleep, we decided to sneak out of the chalet and have dinner at one of the rumored local restaurants. It was said that they served the best steaks and wine there, and the atmosphere was so romantic that people left there with the intention of having another child. There really wasn't any romance that evening. The restaurant was cozy, but suddenly the waitress, smiling slightly bewilderedly, brought a couple to us. According to her, there were almost no empty seats left, and these two seemed decent people. The man looked about 50 years old, but he held himself confidently, with that calm strength that occurs in men who are accustomed to power over their body, over the situation, perhaps even over people. A fit figure, an expensive watch, light, almost careless gray hair at the temples. He introduced himself as Mark. His wife, a striking brunette with expressive eyes, grinned and said her name was Linda. You could feel the experience in her, not only life, but also feminine, somehow piercing, confident. The conversation quickly gained momentum. Alcohol blurred the boundaries, making the conversation light but filled with hints. First, harmless topics: travel, work, interesting incidents from life. Then there are adult jokes bordering on something more explicit. Linda turned out to be such a storyteller, and her stories about her stormy youth evoked in Mark that same mixture of love and patience that happens in men who have lived with the same woman for decades. He looked at her as if he knew all her secrets, and he loved her not in spite of, but precisely for them. "How long have you been together?" Victoria suddenly asked, spinning her glass of wine. "More than 20 years, Mark answered, taking a sip of whiskey. But you know, life is never ideal. Sometimes you have to adjust it to suit yourself." I tilted my head slightly, peering at him with interest. "In terms of—" Mark put the glass on the table, looked at us appraisingly, and calmly continued. "Linda passed. Let's say, the test for treason. When I was on a business trip for 2 years, she met another man. And when I returned, she told me everything." I felt Victoria hold her breath. Not out of shock, but rather out of pure curiosity to such everyday turns. "And," I asked, without waiting for the continuation. "I forgave. But we realized that we needed something new to bring back the passion. So we're experimenting. One way is to exchange partners." At this moment, I put the glass on the table a little slower than usual. Victoria blinked, but left her expression unchanged. "An interesting approach," she said with perfect neutrality in her voice. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Linda slowly lean forward, her smile becoming a little more predatory. "It really freshens up the relationship," she said, her fingers carelessly sliding along the stem of the glass. "You are young, beautiful. Maybe you want to try?" I pretended to be deep in thought and slowly turned my gaze to Victoria, who seemed to be struggling to hold back her laughter. "What do you say, dear?" She paused, took a sip of wine, and leaned closer to me. "I think it's time to go back to our room before these people drag us into their experiments," she whispered in my ear, and then, smiling louder, she added, "Thank you for the interesting offer, but we already have plans for the evening." We stood up. Mark and Linda exchanged glances that read, "These are not yet ripe, but they have everything ahead." I took Victoria's hand, and we left the restaurant, holding back our laughter until we were on the street. "Do you think they are really happy?" she asked, turning around. "They look like people who know what they want," I replied with a shrug. Victoria grinned. "Well, we know exactly what not we want." When we returned to the room, Victoria was still giggling. "You see, Alex, a family vacation can bring unexpected experiences. Maybe we can write a book about this. Yes, how to prevent yourself from being unraveled in Colorado. I think it will be a bestseller, especially if you put your face on the cover at the moment they proposed this experiment." As soon as we returned home, we were immediately sucked into the usual whirlwind of workdays. The holiday was wonderful, but reality demanded attention. I was back in business with Mike. Our business was growing, contracts were multiplying, investors were waiting for results. We expanded production, agreed on partnerships with new clients, and prepared to enter the international market. I was completely absorbed in work, but even amid all this fuss, I noticed that Victoria had also begun a new, serious stage. I began to notice changes. She was constantly checking her phone. Her working hours were even longer than usual, and her thoughts seemed to be somewhere far away, even during dinner. These were not alarming signals, rather harbingers of big changes. "Vic, did something happen?" I asked in the evening when she, absent-mindedly looking at the laptop screen, put down her fork with her half-eaten dinner. "What? No. It's just—" She sighed, thought for a second, and then finally smiled. It seems they want to promote me. I put the glass of wine on the table and looked at her carefully. Is this serious? Very. The general manager is leaving for another company, and one of the main candidates for his place is me. He whistled at her. Damn it, Vic, this is a huge step. She nodded, but in her eyes there was not only joy, but also slight concern. This is a huge responsibility. If I am approved, the workload will be enormous. Constant meetings, trips, negotiations. You know what that means. I knew. This meant that she would have even more work, that our already infrequent dinners together could become a rarity, that Danny would see her more often on video calls than at breakfast. But on the other hand, I couldn't help but be proud. Victoria has always been ambitious and talented. She deserves this chance. Do you want this? I asked directly. She looked at me for a long time. Yes, I've worked for this all my life, but it's important for me to know that you will support me. I took her hand and squeezed it lightly. Vic, if you want this, go ahead. I can handle dinners alone with Danny. The main thing is that you are happy. She smiled and covered my hand with hers. Thank you, Alex. You know, sometimes you are even better than I think about you. I chuckled. Then think well of me more often. The following weeks passed in tense anticipation. Victoria talked about endless meetings with top management, about new responsibilities that were gradually transferred to her, about plans for large-scale reforms. I saw how excited she was about this opportunity, how she loved the feeling of power and new challenges. One evening, when we were about to go to bed, Victoria suddenly said, Alex, if I'm approved, it will change everything. I turned to her and raised an eyebrow. In what sense? This is not just a new position. This is a new level. I will be responsible for global projects and international negotiations. This may mean moving, long business trips. I exhaled and thought. I understood that it was logical that such a position requires full involvement, but the prospect that Victoria would appear at home less and less often was not encouraging. Can we handle it? I asked, trying to keep my voice even. She smiled and lightly touched my cheek. We always managed, Alex, and I'm not going to change that. I wanted to believe. I really wanted to. As Victoria immersed herself in her new position, Danny's home and upbringing smoothly moved into my hands. In theory, it sounds simple. I am a grown man who runs a business, negotiates, and makes deals. It would seem that coping with everyday life and a child is a piece of cake. In practice, everything turned out to be not so smooth. The first test is breakfast. Victoria could cook a delicious breakfast out of nothing, and well, let's just say I knew where the phone with the food delivery app was in the house. Dad, what's for breakfast? Danny asked on the first morning of our life as men. Cereal. We've run out. Okay, then avocado toast. No avocado either. Fried eggs. Do you remember that you burned it last time? Okay, sandwiches. With what? With meaning. In the end, he ate cookies with milk, and I drank black coffee, thinking about how difficult life is for single fathers. The next day, I was smarter and ordered breakfast delivery in advance, but I didn't know that Danny hates omelets, and they brought me a latte with vanilla syrup instead of strong espresso. Defeat. The next point is school. Danny, fortunately, was an independent child, but I still managed to miss the ride, get confused with his schedule, and forget to sign some important papers. When the teacher sent me a message, Alex, Danny is not being taken away from school, is everything okay? I realized that I still couldn't cope. To top it all off, I accidentally dressed him in his gym uniform one morning on the day they had a formal event. In the end, he looked like he had come straight from a jog to a school board meeting. Homework became a separate challenge. Mathematics? Yes, no problem. Only the modern curriculum was different from what we taught, and Danny's explanations sounded to me like spells in Latin. Dad, you're making the wrong decision. It is necessary through a system of equations. Why can't you just add the numbers? Because it doesn't work that way. But I did accounting like this for 5 years. Mom says that you have an accountant. Don't ruin my moment, Danny. In the end, I realized that it was easier for us to retake this class together than to understand the new learning system. Life also made adjustments. I learned how to do laundry, but at first I managed to dye Victoria's white shirts baby pink because someone washed them with a red t-shirt. Danny laughed like crazy, and I cursed everything in the world because I knew how my wife would punish me for this ridiculous and thoughtless step. Desperately tried to wash it, even Googled how to bleach clothes without traces of a crime. As a result, I had to buy new shirts, hoping that Victoria wouldn't notice the difference. But despite all the failures, I began to understand that time with my son is not just care, but an opportunity to truly get to know him. We watched movies, argued about who could assemble Legos faster, and on weekends we went to the park, where he taught me how to do tricks on a scooter. I even almost broke everything possible a couple of times, but at the same time I felt not only like a father, but also a part of his world. The climax of my paternal triumph was my attempt to cook dinner. I decided that pizza was too easy, so I turned to pasta carbonara. By the time I realized that cream and sour cream were not the same thing, it was already too late. Danny bravely took a couple of bites and said, "Dad, can I just eat yogurt?" Victoria noticed our efforts and sometimes jokes. "How are my men doing? Alive? Didn't the house burn down? We can handle it," I answered cheerfully. "Yeah, so you live on cookies and frozen pizza. I would call it a survival diet." She laughed, and I understood that, despite the chaos, there was something right in this family whirlwind. I didn't just cope, I learned to be a father without shifting responsibility to my wife. And even if my toasts with meaning did not replace Victoria's breakfasts, I knew that Danny would remember these days as the best times when he and I were a team. Gradually, the atmosphere in the family began to change. I couldn't tell that anything had happened suddenly, like lightning had struck a clear sky. No, it was slow, almost imperceptible, like water wearing away a stone. At first, you just feel a slight coolness, then you notice that your hands are already frozen, and at some point you realize that you are standing in an icy river. On the contrary, the relationship with Danny became stronger. We spent more and more time together. We did homework, watched movies, discussed books, and sometimes he even persuaded me to play his favorite computer games. He smashed me mercilessly, but I wasn't angry. On the contrary, I liked to see his excitement, hear his laughter, feel how a real connection was being established between us. He began to come to me for advice, and I understood that this was rare for a teenager. This brought us closer, but at the same time exacerbated the feeling of emptiness on another front. With Victoria, everything turned out differently. Her new position completely absorbed her. Long working hours, meetings, calls, urgent reports, all this turned our life into a series of short interactions between tasks. Sometimes we ate dinner together, but more often than not she either came too late or ate on the go, staring at her laptop screen. On the weekends, she simply lay in bed, trying to regain her strength, but even then her phone did not stop ringing. I began to notice things that I had previously ignored. She hardly laughed. Our nightly conversations disappeared, those that used to last for hours, when we shared thoughts, dreams, and just chatted about nothing. Sex? It was easier to meet a unicorn in Mike's office than to catch Victoria in the mood. I made no complaints, but the sediment on my soul became more and more noticeable. One evening, I was sitting at a bar with Mike. Quiet music, dim lights, the smell of wood and alcohol in the air. The atmosphere was inviting. We ordered whiskey. I took the glass and twirled it in my hand, watching how the amber liquid refracted the light. Then, almost without thinking, he said, "You know, sometimes I wonder if it's worth it. All this. Business, career, money. We've achieved so much, but damn, sometimes I feel like we're losing something more important." Mike looked at me with a knowing grin, took a sip, and shook his head. "Welcome to the club, brother. We ourselves create this world. All for what? To one day realize that we are sitting in expensive houses alone?" I grinned, but a bitter truth pierced me inside. "I thought everything was different with Vic," I admitted. "We always said that family is most important." "And she most likely thinks so," Mike nodded. It's just that, perhaps, in her understanding it looks different. She plows because she wants to be someone, to achieve something. You plow because you want to give her everything. But here's the problem: if both rush forward without looking back, one day you may find that you are no longer together, but on different roads. I thought, twirling the glass in my hands. So what's the solution? How not to lose balance? Mike chuckled, leaned slightly towards me, and spoke more quietly, as if he was revealing a secret. I was taught this in anger management courses. Control is not always suppression. It's a search for balance. If you just bottle up your emotions, they will explode sooner or later. If you live only for work, one day you will wake up to an empty house. It is important to find a middle ground. It's the same in a family. Everyone should have the opportunity to be an individual, build something of their own, but at the same time not forget that relationships are also work. It's attention, it's the little things. If one side gives itself completely to something, the other inevitably begins to feel unnecessary. I nodded thoughtfully, looking at the liquid dancing in the glass. Mike's words echoed in his head. He's right. We are used to building a career, a future, a financial cushion. But at what point do we stop building a family? Victoria went on another business trip. I took her to the airport, wished her luck, kissed her on the cheek, and watched her disappear into the crowd of passengers. Everything is as usual. The same words, the same farewell gesture. But for some reason there was a strange feeling inside, as if something was wrong, but consciousness could not yet grasp what exactly. On the way home, I decided to stop at a car service center. Regularly looking after Victoria's car has long become a habit. She was not particularly technical and always trusted me in such matters. I periodically took her car for trips, checked the suspension, brakes, and monitored oil consumption, and I just liked to know that everything was in order with the car. She often joked that I took better care of her car than my own, and perhaps she was right. I got behind the wheel, started the engine, looked at the dashboard, and then frowned. Mileage. I knew very well how much Victoria travels per month. Home work home, sometimes meetings in a cafe, rare trips out of town with a friend. She had a stable route, and her mileage varied only slightly. But now the numbers on the odometer were not at all what I expected to see. I quickly calculated in my mind the average mileage per day, per week. No, something didn't add up here. The car traveled much more than it should have. Much more. There could be no mistake. I sat up straighter, squeezed the steering wheel, listening to my inner sensations. The cold lump began to slowly but surely shrink in my chest. It was like that moment when you realize that all the pieces of the puzzle have been in front of you all this time, but you just didn't want to put them together. I looked at the calendar on my phone. I tried to remember the days when Victoria used the car more than usual. But as far as I remembered, nothing special had happened since the last check. All her trips were standard, ordinary workdays, regular weekend. Then where do these extra hundreds of kilometers come from? I sighed, closed my eyes, and leaned back in my seat. I exhaled slowly and tapped my fingers on the steering wheel. The question was, what am I going to do next? She was betrayed, and it doesn't matter what words follow now. All these mistakes, it's not what you think, I felt alone, are garbage. Words don't matter. What matters is the fact. She stepped over me. She made a choice. And this choice speaks more than any excuse. She put me in second place. Pushed aside, devalued, exchanged. And most importantly, she didn't say, not a word. She just continued to live as if nothing had happened. As if this is normal. It's like I'm nobody. So what now? Tolerate? Close your eyes? Forgive? No, never. I will not bear these horns with pride. I won't make excuses for her. I won't give her a chance to play the part of the repentant one. She made her choice, now it's my turn. Revenge or just leave. With a sunny day, a light breeze, and the aroma of grilled meat, the day started out like a perfect birthday should. Danny was bustling around in the yard, helping to set the table. His wife was busy with the baby, who demanded all the attention. Mike and his wife promised to arrive a little later, As always, late and with the most expensive wine because you are too selective. And Lee was supposed to come. She always came. I stood at the grill, turning steaks, feeling the heat from the hot coals pleasantly warm my hands. The thick, spicy aroma of roasting meat hung in the air, mixing with light notes of smoke. Laughter was heard nearby, snatches of conversations, the clinking of glasses. Life was seething around, filling the evening with comfort and warmth. I watched this usual bustle. My grandson was running across the lawn, barefoot, laughing, carefree, and the adults were talking leisurely, enjoying the peace and the taste of cool drinks. The evening sun softly painted everything around in warm golden orange tones, and a light breeze swayed the treetops, bringing with it the smell of freshly cut grass. It's a strange feeling. 15 years ago, I couldn't even imagine that one day I would be standing here in this yard, calmly cooking a barbecue and just enjoying the moment. Then, when everything was falling apart at the seams, when the future seemed unsteady and unpredictable, I did not know what awaited me ahead. But here I am standing here, breathing in this summer evening, feeling the warmth of the fire, listening to my native voices. Life goes on, and perhaps for the first time in a long time, I feel that it is going exactly where it needs to go. Dad, seriously, can't you just buy normal sauce? Everyone knows that your secret recipe is ketchup with a couple of drops of whiskey. Danny laughed, putting a plate of chopped vegetables on the table. Hey, respect traditions. This sauce has stood the test of time. You liked him as a child, I retorted, shooing him away with a towel. As a child, I liked plasticine, but that doesn't mean I want to eat it now. I chuckled as I turned the meat. Damn, he grew up so fast. It seems like just yesterday I was teaching him to ride a bike, and now he is already a father himself. His son, my grandson, was sitting on the grass and trying to figure out how to eat a carrot without half of it remaining on his cheeks. Do you even realize that your grandson will inherit your gastronomic preferences? Came the voice of Lee, who had just entered the yard, carrying a bottle of wine and cake in her hands. By the way, yesterday I gave him normal baby porridge, and he made such a face as if I had mixed broccoli and salt for him. Because the boy knows a lot about food, I grinned, taking the cake from her. You are punctual as always. Certainly. Someone has to show up on time while your elite Mike is delayed again because he chose the rarest wine in town. I laughed and led her to the table. The day promised to be the way it should be: warm, noisy, full of jokes and smiles. When everyone had gathered, the table was already laden with food. Roasted meats, fresh vegetables, snacks, bottles of chilled wine, everything as it should be on this day. Grandson Danny managed to get dirty with ice cream before the feast even began, and Mike, as promised, showed up with an expensive bottle of wine and a victorious smile. Old man, you should leave the meat alone and start tasting. He patted me on the shoulder, putting the bottle on the table. I brought something here that you will definitely like. I hope it's better than what you chose last time. I raised an eyebrow and Lee grinned. Oh, so someone still remembers that nightmare with the exclusive French wine, she teased. Mike rolled his eyes theatrically. Well, yes. I made a mistake once in my life, and now they will tease me about it until the end of my days. Mike sat down next to me, filled our glasses with wine, and nodded toward Lee with a grin. Have you ever thought that she is always there? He asked, taking a sip of wine. I took a sip as I watched Lee laugh at something Danny had just said. She's a good person, I said simply. Yes, but you know what's interesting? Mike leaned closer. She looks at you as if she sees something that you don't know about yourself. I chuckled but didn't answer. Mike knew me too well not to notice that I ignored his words. I'm not hinting at anything, old man. I'm just stating a fact. There are people who just stay in your life, and it doesn't matter why. I looked at him, then back at Lee. She turned to me and winked as if she knew what we were talking about. They just stay, I repeated. Mike chuckled and raised his glass. I took a sip of wine and suddenly remembered the first time I met Lee. The day had turned out to be so the morning started with yet another long meeting. The traffic was terrible, and the coffee was too hot to drink and too disgusting to enjoy. In general, it was a why else would it burn day. And then I saw her, a little girl with a help sign on the side of the road. At first, I thought this was some new form of aggressive marketing. Stop, get your car fixed, and get a discount on a stress management course. But unfortunately, there was no advertising, just a car with an open hood and the clearly dissatisfied face of the owner, who looked at the engine as if it had just insulted her mother. I stopped. "Are you having problems?" I asked, getting out of the car. "No, I just like to stand on the road with a sign, checking how many people will pass by." She snorted, brushing her hair out of her face. "Of course, I have problems." The car decided to die at the most inopportune moment. Did she have the right moment? I chuckled, looking under the hood. It turned out to be nothing serious, but for her it was still like launching a shuttle into space. I fixed everything in a couple of minutes, and then I heard something that alarmed me. "So, since you saved me, now you are responsible for me." I raised an eyebrow. "Is this a threat?" "No, it's fate," she said with the most serious look. And damn, it turned out she wasn't joking. Lee came into my life as unexpectedly as her broken car on that highway. At first, everything looked innocent. One call asking for help moving furniture, then, "Oh, I have 2 tickets to the theater, I can't go alone." Then there were sudden appearances in my life, as if it had a built-in radar, picking up the moment when I decided it was time to spend the evening alone. "I was just thinking, you need to unwind," she said one day, sitting down at my table in a cafe where I went for coffee. "Lee, did you even know I was here?" "Certainly. I'm good at predicting the behavior of single men. They're either in a bar or a cafe or hanging out at the gym, pretending to work out and not look at beautiful women. And you decided that I went with the first option." "No, but I was ready to check all three." She clung to my life like a burdock to jeans and was not going to leave. It seemed like her mission was to regularly drag me out of my comfort zone, whether it was a spontaneous trip out of town, a party at her friend's house where I knew no one, or, worse yet, a trip to an art gallery where I suffered while trying to figure out the meaning of a painting that had a blue square and 3 dots on it. Lee quickly found a common language with Danny and his wife. She often helped with her grandson, stating that her mission was to teach the kid all the important things in life, including the art of choosing the best pizza. Danny laughed and his wife just shook her head, but in the end she agreed that the kid was really having fun with Lee. Lee and Mike were the two elements that invariably collided when a group got together. Their verbal skirmishes became as common an element of the feast as bottles of wine and noisy conversations. No one was surprised anymore when they exchanged caustic remarks, egged each other on, and seemed to compete in the art of friendly sparring. "Mike, you've been studying this bottle for an hour now, like a sommelier on an exam. Maybe it's time to just pour it and drink it." Lee deftly snatched the wine from him and winked conspiratorially. "Maybe you'll stop impersonating my mother," Mike retorted, taking the bottle back with exaggerated offense. "Oh, come on," Lee grinned. "I'm too young and too attractive for such a role. Besides, your mother hardly allowed herself the neckline, because of which you are now trying not to look at me." "Oh, so you admit that you're trying to distract me?" "This is already interesting." Mike deliberately squinted, drinking from his glass. "Distract? You're just looking for a reason not to pour the others." Lee defiantly crossed her arms over her chest. "No," Mike grinned, pouring wine into glasses. "I'm just a connoisseur and not a fan of pouring everything into myself. Unlike some. Yes, yes, we all know how much you appreciate it, especially if this is the last bottle and no one else will be able to try it." Their bickering could go on forever, moving from wine to personal habits, from jokes to light teasing. But it was precisely this sparkling, lively atmosphere that made every meeting fun, relaxed, filled with the feeling that we were all a big family. How Lee became part of it, I don't understand. It's just that at some point she was nearby, and without her our evenings would have seemed incomplete. The strange thing is that I never complained. In her presence there was no burden of obligation, hidden reproaches, or quiet expectation of change. Lee was amazing. She didn't demand anything, didn't try to change me to suit her desires, didn't try to prove anything to either me or the world. She simply existed nearby naturally, unobtrusively, like a quiet breeze on a hot day. When necessary, she laughed with me, filling the air with lightness. When necessary, she teased, subtly, playfully, but never overstepping the boundaries. And when moments of silence came, I simply listened deeply, carefully, without judgment. No demands, no pretensions, no ulterior motives. It was as if the most dear, once lost, had suddenly returned. It was simply nearby, breathing in unison, warming with its mere presence. I sat down in a chair, took a glass, and looked around. A strange feeling spread in my chest, not euphoria, not a surge of emotions, but something calm, deep, like an understanding that I was where I should be. Life moves on, and that's good. How was life for my ex-wife? Sometimes Danny talked about her latest successes. Victoria always knew how to get her own way, and her career was proof of this. I never asked, but he himself mentioned from time to time how his mother signed another lucrative contract, expanded her business, and entered the list of the most influential women in her field. He spoke about this calmly, without pathos, simply as a fact. He never touched on how our relationship ended, and I was grateful for that. Danny always tried to support both of us, without choosing sides, but one evening, when we were sitting on the terrace with a glass of whiskey, he suddenly said, "You know, Dad, I think you did what any man should do." I didn't answer, just looked at him. He did not develop the topic. I just took a sip and moved the conversation to something else. But his words stuck in my head. From time to time, I came across articles about Victoria, interviews, photographs from business meetings, analytical materials about the rapid growth of her company. She did what many thought was unattainable. She rose from the ruins when it seemed that everything was lost. She managed not only to return, but also to fly higher than before. She rebuilt her career, proving to the whole world that a woman with willpower and intelligence can overcome any obstacles. But one thing remained the same. Despite all her achievements, Victoria never found what she perhaps wanted most: forgiveness. I knew it. Outwardly, her life seemed perfect. Recognition, influence, success. Her working day was scheduled minute by minute, surrounded by influential people. But in the evenings, when the city fell asleep, her house remained empty. No one was waiting for her behind a closed door. No one was interested in how exactly she liked her morning coffee with or without milk. No one knew what film she turned on when she was alone, and what she did in those moments when fatigue overwhelmed her. She was able to build an empire from ruins, but she never built a bridge to her own forgiveness. Once, at one of the get-togethers with Mike, his wife, and Lee, we came across a topic that concerned each of us in our own way. Why do people still cheat? What motivates them? Cheating is a strange thing. No one grows up thinking, "Someday I will betray the person closest to me." Nobody plans or dreams about it. But at some point, something changes. The thin, barely perceptible line is blurred, and the person ceases to realize that he has already crossed it. At first, it is just a fleeting thought, a slight hint in the mind that seems harmless. Then flirting, playing, a slight deviation from the usual route, and then more. "It's still interesting when exactly this starts," said Catherine, Mike's wife, twirling a glass of wine in her hands. There was a slight half-smile on her lips, but there was something thoughtful, almost alarming, in her eyes. At the moment when temptation appears, or when a person first thinks that he has the right to do this, sometimes it has nothing to do with who is nearby. Mike shrugged, thoughtfully tapping his fingers on the rim of his whiskey glass. Some cheat not because their partner is bad, but because at some point they want something new, or because they think they can pull it off without consequences. It seems to them that this will remain a secret and will not offend anyone. But everything becomes a secret sooner or later. And sometimes everything is much simpler. Lee took a sip of whiskey, twirled the glass in her hand, and grinned. There was a note of irony in her voice, but something similar to bitterness slipped into her eyes. People just don't appreciate what they have until they lose it. And when they lose, they blame everyone but themselves. It's like a broken toy in childhood. while the new one is your favorite. But as soon as you see another one, more beautiful, more interesting, the old one no longer seems unnecessary. I nodded, leaning back in my chair, and ran my fingers along the rim of my glass. The flames of the candles cast a soft light on the table, and the tart aroma of alcohol, mixed with notes of expensive perfume, filled the air. The conversation was light, but there was some heaviness hidden underneath. Each of us knew what we were talking about. Everyone had their own story behind them. It all starts long before the fact of betrayal, I said, squeezing the glass in my hands. With a little thought. Thoughts that it is possible. I saw different people. Men who cheated because they felt undervalued, unnoticed, unnecessary. Women who lacked attention, emotions, and passion. Some were driven by a thirst for power, a feeling of permissiveness. For some banal boredom routine from which they wanted to escape. Someone was looking for confirmation of their attractiveness, afraid of losing themselves, their youth. And someone simply did not know how to tell the truth that he was no longer happy, but did not want to destroy what had already been built. Perhaps you are wondering why Victoria cheated. I've replayed this in my head many times. I went through the moments, analyzed the views, remembered our conversations. I could probably find 1,000 explanations. She was ambitious, purposeful, energetic, and perhaps at some point it seemed to her that our life had become too predictable, too smooth. Or maybe she herself didn't understand what she wanted until she lost everything. I never asked her about this directly. I never wanted to hear excuses because they wouldn't change anything. But I knew she didn't do it out of love for another, and not even because she was unhappy. She did this because she once admitted that she had the right to do so. But this is the essence of treason. It begins long before the first betrayal, just with one small thought, with the thought that it is possible. But no matter how you try to find a reason, alcohol, jealousy, resentment, anger, loneliness, weakness, euphoria of the moment, nothing can justify what you did. I've heard thousands of excuses. Lie. Nothing happens by itself. Everyone who cheats is aware of this, even if not at the first moment, but at that second when he is faced with a choice, he knows what he is doing. And if he does this, it means he is ready to live with it. Cheating is not just a betrayal of a partner. This is self-betrayal. Your word, your honor, your conscience. Because after the first time this barrier collapses, then it's easier to lie, easier to hide, it's easier to repeat. So, step by step, a person turns into someone whom he may have even disdained before. One day I heard, "In life there are moments of weakness, and you can't argue with that. But what distinguishes those who remain faithful from those who betray? Just one thing: control. The ability to curb desires, suppress impulses, and say no to myself. After all, weakness does not cancel the consequences, just as ignorance of the law does not exempt you from responsibility if you have broken it. I don't know a single person who betrayed and found real happiness in it. You can hide the truth, you can convince yourself that it didn't matter, but the deep mark will remain forever, and the hardest thing is to live with it. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.